Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Fold your own once again to the library here in Tallaght. Very interesting talk this evening, which we'll get on to that in a moment. First of all, mobile phones on silent. Second of all, fire exit in the event of an emergency. Follow me. Just up the steps and to the left-hand side, okay? Right, most important, take immediate action. Just follow me. None of this women and children stuff. Every man and woman for us and him and for herself, okay? Delighted to see you all remember to put your clocks back. I'm sure we'll have somebody turning up about 8 o'clock this evening. We'll all have a great big laugh at their expense. So just to remind you folks, we have, this is, I'm delighted to see so many here because we have 2 lectures this month which may kind of lead the people thinking things are little, but it's great to see so many of you here tonight. And our talk tonight now, I'm much looking forward to, on Bog Bodies, and our speaker tonight, our person making this presentation, John Dolan here beside me. John was in IT all of his life, and having spent all of his life in IT, which is very, very modern technology of course, what did he do? Only he returned to UCD as a mature student, where he graduated in archaeology and Celtic civilization. So he took a step all the way backwards.
To my childhood. I should know from the presentation.
When he was a chiseler, back in the caves long ago. Okay. So without further ado, I'll give you John Dolan and Bog Bodies.
Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for inviting me to talk to you this evening. And I only hope that I can meet the quality of the presentation we had here just a couple of weeks ago on the underwater archaeology and the stuff that was found from the Armada ships that were taken out of the sea in Donegal and the west coast of Ireland. I was surprised in a way how many people came up to me and said, well, we're sort of interested in this topic. It certainly does arouse a fair amount of interest. And quite a few of you may have seen recent articles both in newspapers and on television about current finds of bog bodies. But there have been documentaries done by BBC 2 and BBC 4 and the Discovery Channel and the National Geographic. And there's actually a couple of documentaries up on YouTube about bog bodies. So it is a topic that interests people, all right. And in tonight's program, I want to go through a fair bit of background and then show you some examples. But instead of showing you the examples you might have come across in the National Museum in there in Kildare Street, it will be mainly European examples that I show you. And I do hope you find it of interest. What we've got to realise is that bog bodies are found all over Europe and outside Europe. Now you might be surprised that the majority of the European bog bodies are found in Russia today. Most of them are soldiers left over from the Second World War, both Russian soldiers and German soldiers, who, as you know, in parts of Russia, very swampy, very boggy, never made it home. Nearly all of the ones we'll talk about are those that had violent endings. And in difference to the ones you find in Ireland, quite a few of them have clothes on them or other artifacts around them. One of the difficulties we have in Europe is that there's no standard on how you treat a dead body. In Ireland, it's a matter of professional guidelines more than law. But the most restrictive legal environment has come out of the English system, the English heritage, where because of the pressures put in by Druids, the new Druids in Britain, the way bodies are treated in England is now very different from the rest of Europe. European bogs are a remnant of the last ice age. I'll show you a map in a moment, but as the ice melted across Europe at the end of the ice age, the land that emerged was initially tundra, and then bog, and then forest, and then agricultural land. So over thousands of years, bogs emerged that stretch right across Europe. And it's from these bogs that we find our bog bodies. Most of the bogs, like our own Irish bogs, are nearly gone. reclaimed, drained, turned to agricultural use. But a few areas still have bogs, and again mainly the lowlands, and I'm talking about Holland and Denmark, and we'll show you a few examples from there. In prehistory, the bogs were used extensively. We all know about the trackways that are built across the bogs, the wooden trackways that are built across the bogs in Longford, Galway, some in Wicklow. And the bogs themselves were used for different elements. Obviously, turf was used, but they also had something called bog ore, which is really hard, black type of bog. The bogs were useful too for the people in prehistory and in current times for medicine. They used to pick flowers, they used to pick things we would now call weeds, and use those as part of ordinary medicine. And then lastly, the bogs were treated as places of special times, liminal places, places close to the other world. And of course we're in the middle of that season today with Halloween. The Festival of Sound, the old Festival of Sound, was when today's world met the other world. And the stories about the puka, where the puka used to live underground. All of these came from the liminal areas of the divide between life today and the other world. There's a problem with this map actually, and I only spotted it when I was going through. At the time when the Ice Age covered most of Northern Europe, the Mediterranean hadn't formed. At that time, Ireland was joined on to Britain, certainly through Scotland and Antrim, most likely across what they call the Isle of Man corridor from, say, Dublin straight across to Liverpool, and perhaps also down to the Wexford level. There's a lot of research going on at the moment trying to find out exactly what parts of Ireland were joined on to Britain, and as we all know, Britain was joined onto Europe at that stage. And as the ice melted, the amount of water in the seas rose, and we had the break between Antrim and Skye, and we also had the break at the Straits of Gibraltar that flooded the Mediterranean. We know this because we find African animals that came straight through into southern Europe, and rhinoceros bones have been found in Devon and Dorset in England. Don't know how they got there. It would have been a long walk from Central Africa. If you've seen the documentaries of the Bog Bodies, you realise how scientifically Bog Bodies are being analysed at the moment. And it's not just the bodies themselves. They're interested in the area around the body, in the bog itself. They look at pollen count, because from the pollen count they can decide what trees and shrubs and plants grew around that area at that time, and what was the volume of trees. And over thousands of years, and I'm talking about 700, 800,000 of years, they can work out how forestation happened in Ireland, what the bogs were originally before the bog was there. And if ever of you have been out over to the Caja fields in Mayo, you'll have seen that. The bog wasn't the original thing. And bogs have been growing and shrinking in Ireland ever since. So a lot of the scientific analysis that's done is in this environmental analysis area. Beetles are an interesting one. Beetles like certain types of wood. So if you're missing beetles of a certain type, then you know that that wood wasn't growing there. What I tell you about is the temperatures. Certain types of beetles like cold, other types of beetles like heat. So depending on which type of analysis you can do, you can build up a picture of what the environment was around the bog as the bog grew. When they find a bog body, they do every sort of analysis that you find going on in James's Hospital today. They use current medical science to research the body, and we'll come to that later as we go along. The bottom one, I had to look up in the dictionary, I had no clue what it was. It is the study of dust. And as we know, in a number of the bog bodies, they found certain things in their intestines, including dust. So do we know how many bog bodies there are? Well, I have a couple of figures coming up, but in general, nobody knows. In the good old days, if a body was found in the bog, it was felt that Paddy got drunk going home from the pub last night and fell in. And we better whip the body out fast and bring him over to the cemetery and give him a proper burial. So an awful lot of the ones in the very early stages were regarded as unfortunates and were reburied almost immediately, with very little information, maybe a line or two in a local newspaper saying a strange event happened in such and such a bog, the body was reburied almost immediately. The other thing is, when they found the body and took it up, like most things taken out of their environment almost immediately, they start to decay. So if you really got a chance to call somebody who was supposed to know about things and get them there within a couple of hours, you would have seen the body start to decay. And that was another reason why they reburied them fairly fast. In the early 60s, they did an estimate of the number of bodies in Europe at 1,600. Actually, there's a lot more than that. These are the numbers that are agreed that exclude Eastern Europe. And you say to yourself, well, where are the 70 to 90 bog bodies in Ireland? Most of those were reburied. In the National Museum in Kildare Street, they have about 35 of them, all lying down on trays inside. When you go to the exhibition, you see 4 individuals, but the rest of them are inside, most of them in a very bad state of preservation. Now, when you read about bog bodies in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, it's a bit like reading the red tops today. Most of it was sensational stuff. You know, strange body found in such and such a place. Must have been murdered. Police investigation. But they never went anywhere. But all of these have been used as excuses or theories as to how the bog bodies got there. Even more strange ideas as to how the bodies got there. Edward Lund in 2002 reckoned that all bog bodies belonged to witches. Now, if he was around Ireland in Samhain, he'd probably agree with that. But who knows? There was another American guy, he's an anthropologist, in 2011, studied 145 of them, and reckoned that there's nothing odd with these things, just people buried them in the bog, and that was it. You know, nothing strange whatsoever. So there are multiple theories, and not one theory works. Barry Raftery was a professor of archaeology in UCD, and he died there about 18 months ago. But Barry was an expert on Iron Age in Europe, and obviously a really good expert in Iron Age in Ireland. And Barry's view was they were killed and buried in the course of ritual activity. Barry Cunliffe, who is an English professor of archaeology, put it perhaps slightly differently, but the same sort of idea of an offering to the gods, really. And then Eamon Kelly in the National Museum has written a lot of articles and a couple of books that bodies were placed in the ground as a supplicant to the goddess, saying, we're giving you this offering on the assumption that our new king will have a successful reign and bring wealth and riches. It was also seen as a sign of fertility for both the people and the land. But Eamon's theories were based around the concept that the bodies were buried near to boundaries. And the boundaries he used in most of his articles are baronies. And I'll come to the next slide as to how this is being challenged in today's world. He also reckoned that a lot of the bodies were buried as a form of punishment. And when we look at the details, we see that, yes, a lot of these bodies were badly damaged as the person lived and was killed and buried. Eamon's theories, unfortunately, aren't generally accepted. He bases a lot on Croghan Hill. Now, if you drive on I think it's the M4 motorway going across from Dublin to Galway, as you get near Kilbeggan, on the left-hand side, you'll see Croghan Hill. It's an extinct volcano that arose out of the sea when Ireland was covered with water. And at the top of it, you can see a cairn, just a little bump on the top of the hill. And around it, from the big photograph, you can see nothing but bog. It's hard to get into Croghan from the village of Road in County Offaly up to Croghan Hill and back again. That's probably the best road to get in there. But it's an area where a lot of mystique and folklore exists. As I say, Kelly's views have been challenged, primarily on the basis that he only studied 8 bodies. The other problem was nobody knew where the boundaries were in the Iron Age. The Irish king ruled a Tua, and they reckoned there was about 150 Tua in Ireland at the time. But nobody knows where the boundaries were. And the other idea of fixing a boundary to a bog also isn't valid. Bogs don't have boundaries. They grow and they shrink. So trying to find out where the boundaries were, 1,000, 1,500 years before Christ, and comparing it with boundaries today just doesn't work. The main boundary in the Irish system is the townland. That's the primary boundary. The other boundaries came much later. Parish boundaries came in the 12th century, and barony boundaries came in the 16th century. Tacitus, talking about the Celts of Gaul, said, "The coward, the shirker, the disreputable body are drowned in miry swamps under the cover of wattled hurdles." And quite a lot of the bog bodies, Irish and European, were taken, laid in the bog water, and then pinned down with stakes. The stakes weren't driven into the bodies, they were angled on the body so the body couldn't come back up again. Tacitus knew about this from Rome. As I said earlier, we can learn an awful lot from the bogs, particularly things like the seeds and the pollen. Vegetation grew over thousands of years. Volcanic ash. Everywhere in Ireland you'll find traces of volcanic ash. The two main deposits are from the volcano called Hekla in Iceland. And the two main volcanic traces that are left, one is from 1104 and the other is from 1341. But there are dozens of traces of volcanoes, Central European volcanoes, Asian volcanoes, where the ash lands in Ireland. We know all this because some of us were disrupted. Is it 2 years ago, when planes didn't fly?
Yeah.
How do bogs preserve? One of the things people ask is, well, the bogs themselves, how do we know, how does it happen? There are two issues. One is lack of oxygen. The lack of oxygen means that bacteria doesn't grow. So the normal bacteria that would cause a body to disintegrate doesn't work in a bog. And the other one is acidity levels. This matters because depending on the level, you either wind up with a bog body or you wind up with skeletons. And we'll have examples of both. So it's the bog itself that's preserved. And you have two views there as to how it happened. One is obviously the top picture, somebody being hung before they were put into the bog hole, and the other one being brought down and put into the bog hole before they were staked down. I've talked about that already, so I'll skip on that one. An awful lot of the bodies we look at were killed in 3 different ways. A smash to the head, a cut to the throat, and being stabbed. And many times the same body was killed all 3 ways. So they really wanted to make sure they were dead before they buried them. Map, it's fairly old, it's 1970s, of where bog bodies were found then. Now there have been a few bog bodies found since, but not that many. Perhaps about 5 in Ireland. But in general, they're the places you'd expect, places where there are bogs. The ones with the circles around them, if you can see them, is where multiple bodies have been found in the same bog or close to one another. And some poor student went off and had a look at old newspapers to try and find traces or parish records of where bodies had been found and then reburied. And you can see, even in the 1750s, they were recording bog bodies. Big spike in the 1800s. 1850s was the famine, so nobody was recording anything really at that stage. And then in more recent times, more records of bodies being found. We know about these. These are the ones that most people talk about in Ireland. I think there's only one example in Ireland of a female being found. We'll show you a number of the European ones later on, but most of the ones being found in Ireland have been males. And the last one there, Cashel-Man, wasn't found in December 2012. I think it was 2011, but the last report or paper produced about Cashel-Man was produced in December 2012. The oldest in Ireland is from County Galway. The oldest in Europe is from Denmark. And what's left of the Danish is skeleton, bog body itself. I should know that when the body is preserved in the Irish bog, the skin turns to leather. So when the bog body is taken out, you really are taking item out, made of leather. Leather skin, leather in. This is the Cashel bog one in County Laois. The machine that was digging out the clay left half of it behind and never found the other half. That happens a lot. Most of the bodies being found today are being found with fellows not using a slam to dig turf. It's been found by machines digging turf, so they get mangled. And I'm sure over the last 40 years of Board in the Morning, there's been a couple of hundred bog bodies milled out of it, and nobody ever saw them. You know, you might have been putting your solid turf into your fire, and so you found half a foot sticking out. 4,000 years old, this guy, and there's been a few reports about it since, but there's no formal scientific report produced about this guy. I'd say sometime next year, 2014, we'll have our usual Discovery Channel documentary, or BBC Two documentary on Cashel-Man. They're still studying. The most recent one was last November, found in Kinnegad, and as yet there's absolutely no information coming through about and you can see the state he's in. I'm not sure what state he was put in before they dug him out, but he doesn't look good today. And then we have the famous exhibition in the National Museum, and anybody who goes into the National Museum will find an awful lot of people spending a bit of time looking at these ones. The red hair is interesting. A lot of the bog bodies wind up with red hair. And the reason for that is the chemicals in the bog water itself getting to the hair and turning it red. And we'll see a few more examples later on. I did mention Denmark, and on the map of Denmark you have both skeletons and bog bodies. Red for skeletons, blue for bog bodies. But they've found quite a few, and we'll have some details. 34% of them are clothed. There is no examples in Ireland or England of bog bodies being found with clothes on. In Europe you do find them with clothes, and we'll show you some examples of what clothes they were wearing. Yeah, this is an odd one. I don't call these people bog bodies, the Americans do. They produced 2 articles in a magazine called American Archaeology, would you believe, about their bog people. They're really swamp people, down in Florida, down in the swamps. What is preserved here is not body, but skeletons only. And they're seriously old. They're older than the Native Americans. And they're trying to find out where they came from. Generally speaking, the skin and most organs are gone. But in 100 of them, they found brain tissue, and they're examining that brain tissue. 160 bodies in all. Burials stretched over 1,000 years. The first guy was called Wind Over Man, but now they had to call them Windover man and Windover woman. Windover is the county in which they were found in the south of Florida. When they did the environmental study of the areas around these bodies, they found it extremely rich, with species of trees and plants and flowers and weeds that they never knew existed in that area when these were buried 6,000 years ago. And that's been a big surprise for them. The other surprise is the fact that they can't connect these people to the early Americans, or what we call the Native Americans. The Native Americans are assumed to have come from the Bering Strait across from Russia in 3 separate waves, and then populated North America, Central America, and Southern America. But as yet, they can't connect these people in the bog or the swamp in Florida with the Native Americans. So it's interesting, more research to be done. We'll now go into a few examples. This man was the first one to be scientifically examined. Manchester police were investigating a murder locally and had sent their technical team to go and investigate the murder when somebody working in the bog pulled this fella out. So the police took over the investigation and they did a full forensic examination of it. And what they found was he'd been hit on the head, his skull smashed in, he'd been garroted, in other words, he'd been choked with a wire or a rope around his neck, and his throat had been slit. So they were making really sure he was dead before they buried him. Because it was a scientific study to examine his stomach, and they found mistletoe pollen in his stomach. Mistletoe pollen only arrives in the Manchester area in March or April. So he was buried in March and April of whatever year he was put into the ground. And that his last meal was a badly cooked bread of wheat and barley. So that's what he looked like. Denmark, again about 300 years before Christ. Here the hearts, lungs and liver were preserved. Now, you can see the rope around his neck. Still there. And you can see his hat. And again, similar last meal. How did the guys in Denmark know to feed them the same way as the guys in Manchester? Nobody knows. More from Denmark. Throat badly cut, skull damaged, last meal of porridge. He was technically examined in the year 2000 when they did most of the analysis. Again, he had a fine mop of hair. Seamus Heaney was so taken with this guy that he wrote a poem to him in 1975. And move on. Her hair, the rope around her neck, and in this case, she had a cover that was assumed to be a cloak around her body. From the scientific analysis, they reckoned that she suffered from scoliosis. But to make sure she stayed in the bog, they tied a huge piece of rope, they tied a rope around her neck, and the rest of the rope around a huge piece of rope, and sunk that into the bog, make sure she didn't get out again. Now these were assumed to be a man and a woman, so they got the nickname Darby and Joan. They were found a really long time ago, and as you can see from the state of the bodies, they had no chance of preserving them. But in the bottom photograph, you can see a copy of the intestines of the larger person. His stomach had been slit open before he was put into the bog. A man and a girl. The girl had been blindfolded, and there was no sign that she had been murdered as such. The man had been strangled and tied down with wooden stakes into the bog. They had assumed it was a girl, but later analysis identified it as a boy. Two buried together. This one from Sweden, and again another fine set of hair and a tunic. Found parts of the lungs, liver and brain survived. And he was well clothed. Tunic, shirt, cloak, bag, shoes, belt, sheath, 2 knives. The odd thing about it was, he was dated in the Iron Age, about 500 BC. But when they examined the clothing, it dated between 1330 and 1360. So they reckon his body had been found in the bog, taken out, clothed and put back in again. Female from Denmark, serious leg injury. Now, whether that was the reason they were put into the bog or not, we don't know. The internal organs did survive in this case. Now, you can have a look at the fabric that was found with the body and the way it was woven. Somebody has done an analysis on the weave and described it as Middle Eastern. And it's a bit like finding the Fadenmore Psalter in a bog near Lorra in County Tipperary, and finding papyrus built into the cover of the Psalter. You ask yourself, well, how did one get to the other? How did papyrus get from Egypt to Lorra in Tipperary and got buried in the Psalter? The same way with the weave of this fabric. How did the information on how to do the weaving arrive in Denmark? Yeah, you can see why he was called red. I'm not too sure what style of legs he's got, but they look interesting. I wouldn't say he'd be doing line dancing for a while. But he had a beard and eyebrows, throat slit, broken shoulder, and he had a narrow wound in his back. We're making sure he was dead. Found quite a long time ago. He was relatively well preserved by accident, so they were able to perform a detailed analysis on it about 40 years ago. The preservation was done by smoking it in the same way that you smoke bacon. Now, one of the things that came out of the scientific analysis and the police in Manchester is that they've been using police techniques and technology to rebuild the faces of the people who died. And you can see the example of the girl from Germany on the top row and the man from County Offaly in the bottom row. And that will happen more and more as more bodies are found. They will build the faces and reconstruct them. What you also find is that there's a commonality in how European bog bodies were treated and the Irish and English ones. As you can see, a number of them were disfigured. A number of them had their hair cut before they were buried. And a number of them were pinned down by using stakes as they were buried. So somehow or other there was a commonality in the Celtic culture that stretched from mainland Europe through England and Ireland during that Iron Age period. But obviously we've no documentation on this. Nobody was writing it down at the time. So, to wrap up, where are we getting to? There's no one theory as to why people were buried in this way. It is assumed from examining the Irish ones that they were not worker bees. They were part of royalty, mainly from the state of their skins and their hands. They were well groomed, well looked after, well fed before they were buried. There are obviously major similarities, also differences between the way the bodies in Europe were treated and buried. And the extraordinary thing is that in Europe there seems to be far more female burials than there is in Ireland. We've only one example in Ireland. The other thing is the European ones have far more clothing and artifacts like shoes or daggers or knives along with the bodies. In Ireland, it is felt that they were buried stripped naked. Today, when they come to examine bog bodies, it's a multidisciplinary approach. The medical people get involved, the forensic people get involved, the anthropologists get involved, the biologists get involved. So they take all the specialities and examine the body from multiple points of view to produce their analysis. And it's also true that man's inhumanity to man started a lot earlier than today, from the fact that so many bodies were killed, not in just one way, not by hanging alone, not by smashing a skull in, not by cutting a throat, not by shooting arrows into them, but using 3 or 4 different methods to make sure that they were really dead. And today too, when you bodies, whether through archaeological excavation or accidentally with a bog body, how you treat that body and the respect you show to that dead body is always an issue. And the treatment is different in every European country today. Shin away.
Any questions, folks?
Most of them stayed awake.
I thought you were going to break into the song when you mentioned the Beatles there earlier on. You go to another direction. We just wanted to know, you said about the mistletoe.
Yeah.
I wonder, has that certain...
Yes, good question. The mistletoe was obviously very important in prehistoric times. When the Druids met to pray, it was always in a wooded area, and they always brought mistletoe with them. So mistletoe is assumed to have had a religious significance to the Celtic religion. And today we still have our mistletoe rituals.
I wonder, did they take it like somehow preparing?
I'm not too sure what impact the mistletoe has. I've never put it into a cup of tea.
To ingest it, if it was found after so long in their stomachs, like perhaps it was ingested to some degree. Would they be preparing somebody for
a ritual?
For a ritual, yeah.
Yeah.
Just a matter of interest. For instance, down the mountains, there's been so much talked about the bodies up there, they went around and dug it. I often wonder, and there has been murders being committed up there.
But these were communal murders. This wasn't somebody dragging a guy off and hitting him on the head with a hammer and then burying him.
Yeah.
This was communal violence. This was where the community said, we're going to bury you, kill you and bury you in a particular way. So the killing was obviously more than one person taking on another person. And then the burial would have needed a couple of people to help as well. So it's always regarded as a communal ritual. Now, one of the odd things about it is that if you look at the old Brehon law, the Brehon law had very strict strictures if you did anything wrong. If your cows got out of your field and ate Mrs. Magoo's corn, the penalties were very severe and were laid down. One of the oddities about the bog bodies is that nowhere in the Brehon law is there written down how you treat crimes committed by the royalty. They took ordinary crimes, theft, violation of your property, stealing your water, that type of thing. They took that in great detail and had very specific ways of dealing with it. But at no stage could you see anywhere in the laws how you handled a king, or a brehon, or a druid, or a filly, the poets. They seem to be outside of normal laws. And maybe this was a way of how they treated the upper class if they got out of line. But it was communal violence that was put on. It just wasn't a hit on a hammer over the head and drag them off to the nearest bog pub.
But was there ever any studies, do you know, anything on the Dublin Mountain?
Unfortunately, there's nothing written down.
No.
Prehistory.
No, and
Prehistory is
then
prehistory, you know.
But you could have gangsters who bury a body.
Yeah, no, it was obviously carried out in the community. The fact that there's so many similarities between the European side and the Irish-English side seems to agree with that. And then the fact of putting somebody down and staking them down the bog hole, you needed more than one person. I don't know if you've ever worked in a bog.
I'm sure most of the bodies, it was just a handy place to bury people. There was no religion at those ancient times, and that would be easy ground to dig to put a body into.
Well, they had an older religion, the old Celtic religion, but nowhere where they talked about the old Celtic religion was there anything about this type of treatment. So, yeah, they had their own ways of handling things, without a doubt. Nothing is recorded though as to, you know, what crime you had to commit before you were treated like this. There were strictures on kings. Kings had to do certain things. They had to be good for their people. They had to produce good harvests. They had to fight just wars. You know, there were strictures on kings. But there was no corresponding punishment if they didn't do that.
Significance of pinning somebody down if they had
When
a
they were
throat
already
slit,
dead. When they were already dead.
stabbed, an arrow
They
in
were
the back.
stabbed, hit in the head, and throat slit. They were dead, right?
Yeah.
And then you bring them down, and you stake them down even more.
The significance, I wonder what that is.
Would the stop like up?
It's like concrete feet.
Is it that possibly later on at some stage they might retrieve them? Because otherwise in the bog...
Or maybe it was a form of punishment where they made sure you couldn't get into the afterworld.
Oh,
Right.
That sounds likely, because you'd think it was a privilege to be put into a bog where you wouldn't, well, compared with being buried in a normal fashion, your flesh
I remember
rotting.
in my youth, a young fella pushing another young fella into a bog hole. And I tell you, it wasn't a privilege
Yeah,
to
but
be
he
put
was
into a bog hole.
alive. He was alive. I mean,
No, they were
why
killed
would a
first.
dead body?
They were killed first and then buried.
Yeah.
In the 1600s, it was an honour to be beheaded rather than hanged, right?
Yeah.
And maybe there was some kind of an honour in being buried in a bog,
Yeah.
if they were royalty.
I'm not sure that they'd go voluntarily somehow or other.
No, the guys who were being beheaded didn't go voluntarily either. Can I ask you, in relation to the DNA,
Yeah,
you mentioned the American ones,
yeah,
which were 4,000 years old, I think they said,
yeah,
that they were able to take DNA from them
yeah.
and decide. So has
What-
that
what-
kind sorry, the question I have is, has that kind of analysis been done to the Irish bogs, the Bog Bodies?
I have to say there has been DNA studies done in Ireland,
On Bog Bodies?
but every time, no, not in Bog Bodies, but every time they've done them, they've caused a row. The main place where the studies are done are in Trinity College. There's a couple of bright people in Trinity College who do DNA studies. Now, the type of studies they've been trying to work out is old bodies, not bog bodies, from the Neolithic times, bodies that are 6,000 years old, and find traces right through to today's, to see how Celtic we are. That has caused rows all over the place. The only place it worked, and a few of you may have read this article, was in, what's the monument in Clare? Pound na Brón. You know the Pound na Brón? They found 7 bodies there. 3 of the bodies were in quite good, the bones were in quite good state. The main male skeleton that they got had an arrowhead stuck between his vertebrae. In other words, the reason he died was somebody stuck an arrow in his back. They took DNA from him and then went to the nearby parish and checked the children in the primary school. And they found something like 12% of the kids had DNA from his body. You'd find that by doing a Google search. You'll find that case study there. But the Gardaí do DNA studies regularly, but it's a very specific type of thing. This is sort of DNA research.
How old,
Yeah,
so how old was that body in Clare?
I think 5,000 years old. I wasn't around at the time. I loved it, but I wasn't.
So people didn't move very far.
Yeah, in the Catholic society you stayed in your own tua, and only the royalty could move from one tua to another. St. Patrick found this as a problem when he arrived and wants to go around converting people. If you read his Confessio, it's full of that sort of stuff.
Have you ever used the bog for the preservation of food?
Bog butter.
Oh, yeah.
Bog butter, yeah. Now, I don't know nobody who's taken a bit of bog butter and put it on a piece of bread and tried to eat it. People who find bog butter say it's rank. And it's usually destroyed straight away. Bog butter. But nobody's done a study as to how, the age of various bog butters that have been found to see, are they 600 years old or 1,000 years old. I'm not aware of anybody who's done that study. Another question, yeah?
If there was clothes on the body, does that mean the organs were preserved, or is it just coincidence?
No, the preservation of the organs relate to the amount of oxygen and the acidity level. It's either one of or the other of those things as to why organs were preserved and other things weren't.
Well, seeing me in Germany when they were clothed, the organs were preserved.
No, I don't think there's a direct relationship. It is extraordinary that none of the Irish ones have been found with clothing or shoes or anything, whereas there are things found with the bog bodies in England. I think I forget the number of bog bodies in England, but things have been put with the bodies when they were buried in England, not in Ireland.
Would the aspect of the Irish bog have broken and closed down?
It could have, but there's no evidence that there was closed there in the first place. It could have.
Because the ropes were preserved anyway, so the clothes would have been made from the same material. Really.
Yeah, and a couple of the bog bodies in Ireland, when the people were put down, their arms were put behind their back, and they used ash plants to tie the backs of the arms together. Ash, very thin ash, to tie it because it was bendable. They found traces of that all right.
So that was to do with the druids and that, if we did one like that.
Well, if it's something like that communal violence, well, somebody led the service, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Whether he was the druid or a disappointed king or whatever, somebody ran the show. Somebody organised that Jimmy's the man and we get him on Saturday night.
Would there be a correlation? The fact they don't have clothes on in Ireland, if we look at like European and English culture, even in later times, that there's more abundance of material, wealth, we say. Maybe in Ireland you didn't have that wealth, so if you were going to kill somebody, a wild person, you would have kept the clothes because you didn't have so much of it compared to those other places.
Yeah, there's very little known about clothing in Ireland. There's a huge amount known about clothing in Europe, in Gaul particularly. Caesar talks about it, and quite a number of the other Roman writers talk about it. They talk about it in two ways. One is the number of pelts that the Celtic kings used to wear, like fox and badger and rabbit and whatever else. That was one part of it. The second part of it was when the Celts went into war, they were nearly always naked, both the men and the women. So when they went into battle, it was nearly always naked. So clothing was an issue for them, either in dressing up or not dressing at all. So they had something about clothing. We don't know if the Irish Celts had the same sort of thing. We just don't know. Caesar got very upset the first time he saw these madmen coming down from the hills naked.
Well, they paid their bodies.
You're looking at Braveheart again. No, that is an accepted historical fact. That is written about, that they painted themselves blue.
What, to make themselves look more fearsome, perhaps?
And as a way of...
Antiseptic, was it?
It was also preventing themselves from injury. It was meant to be...
Shield, like.
Yeah. It was a ritual to prevent the other guys getting it. Now, the Roman soldiers still got it.
And even the young girl, like she, the young girl in the slides there,
Yeah.
blindfolded, again, it's evidence of a ritual.
Yeah.
killing.
Oh no, it was a ritual killing, a community killing.
Yeah. And again, from some type of royal or kind of upper
Well, the main thing,
caste or
and the only studies we've seen done in recent times have been on the Irish ones, where they've looked, and you've seen some of the photographs of the hands. I mean, the nails are perfect, recently trimmed. The hair recently cut. Joe Soap didn't get his nails trimmed before he died, you know, or his hair cut. He got a belt of a hammer over the head, and maybe his throat cut.
What about the fact that the hair and the nails continue to grow after death?
Well, they do that all the time.
That's very, very, very short.
For a short period, yeah,
Yeah.
for a very short period. Shinna will. Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you very much.
Really enjoyed that. Thank you very much, John. That was really excellent. We hope to have you here again. John continues his studies, having been a mature student. He's gone backwards in time all the time. He's retreating from the IT age back to the Ice Age, John. Our next lecture will be The Speaker Connolly by Michael Keyes, and that is on Tuesday, the 12th of November 2013. So in the meantime, folks, just wish you all Slán